Hi, I'm Greg from Rev Robotics, and this is continuing part of our Kickoff Concept series that we're doing for the Fright Frenzy First Tech Challenge season. In this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about game pieces and then the field and a little bit about some strategy that your team might want to consider as you're doing your own game breakdown. So for this year's game, Fright Frenzy, we see some of the game objects that we're very familiar with and then some that have been changed up a little bit. So we have the traditional ball and cube. We've seen these in Rescue and in Rover Ruckus. These are great durable game pieces, and there are lots and lots of examples online of great robots that have been picking these up, manipulating them in similar ways that you might do in this year's game. The only main difference is this year you're only going to be manipulating one of these at a time, whereas in those previous games you're manipulating multiples, so that actually might even make the challenge easier in some regards. The other change we have this year is we actually have weighted cubes. So if you notice these little steel slugs that are in the corners of these cubes, these change the weight and a little bit of the dynamics of this cube itself. So for example, a standard cube with nothing weighs 1.7 ounces or so, and there are two different types. There's a half-loaded cube, which is about twice the standard weight at about 3.2, and then there's one that's got 4 slugs in it, although it gets up to like 5.72. So you actually have 3 very distinct objects that, while they look the same, feel the same, they are different weights. So as you're designing your manipulator or your intake or whatever, you're going to want to make sure that you can handle the heaviest one, because the outside surfaces don't change, it's just the weight. So if you could pick up the heaviest one, your manipulator, your claw, your gripper, your conveyor will definitely be able to handle the lighter of these. We'll get into how this plays in with the other game pieces here in a little bit. The other new game object that we've got is this cute little rubber ducky. And the rubber duckies, at the very surface level of the game, you're like, well, how do they play in? But it actually becomes apparent that these are very important to this year's game from a scoring perspective. They're an extremely light object. They're about ½ an ounce each. So, compared to the balls and the cube, they are definitely light. The other thing is that these are very, very compliant. So while these are very, very functionally rigid game objects, because this duck is so squishy, that's something you're going to be able to have to consider, because while you're scoring these, you may need to have either, the question is whether you'll need a dedicated intake or mechanism to deal with just the ducks, or if it'll be able to make one that can handle all 3. I am a little concerned about how soft the ducks are related to, are they going to get trapped in drivetrains? Are they going to clog up conveyors? Are they going to get caught in roller intakes and that type of thing? So that's going to be something that you're going to have to play with quite a bit. But just to kind of give you a feel, if you've ever held a rubber duck before, this is a pretty standard, it's on the smaller end of regular rubber ducks, but it's a rubber duck. It does squeak. Since the game objects are a little bit big this year, I've only got one of them examples on the field. This is the blue shipping hub, and each alliance has one of these themselves. And the object is to basically put game pieces on the 3 different tiers of this hub. The different tiers do have different point values, which I'll get to in a second. But the other important thing about this shipping hub is that it teeters, right? So the bottom of this hub actually is the same type of dome as last year's Ringoal. And it looks like that's the Ringoal with a plate put on the top of it. But what it means is that it's pretty stable. So if it's empty, it'll go back to balanced. If you've got a heavy object on one side, it will hold it in that. When you remove that heavy object, it will go back to the center. So it's a pretty stable object. The dynamics of this are actually pretty interesting, because if I were to take the heaviest cube and just gently place it, I can get it to fall in some cases. In other cases, depending on where it is on the bottom plate, it may or may not fall. The other thing too is that I can place it here and make it not fall, and it'll stay, but if I take this and drop it, I can make the thing fall, and then it won't return back. So one of the objectives for this year's game is actually keeping this balanced. So the points don't matter per level. Whether it's balanced or not, the points are actually going to be worth the same, but there's a bonus for each alliance if at the end of the match this thing is actually balanced. And the balance is like without this rim touching the ground. So that's something to keep in mind, is that if you're tactical on how you place these and how you stack them, you can get extra points for just doing what you've been doing before. There's another object on the field which is a shared shipping hub, and the shared shipping hub looks just like this, but it doesn't have a middle and a top part of the goal. The shared shipping hub is divided both red and blue, and essentially you're trying to score points on it for your alliance, and in that scenario you're trying to tip it. So the shared shipping hub, you want to score as much as you can so that your side is down, and that'll get you some bonus points. So that's those are the main scoring objects for the actual game. I think what we should do is jump over to take a look at how the field is laid out, and then we can go from there. So this is the top view of the playing field from the game manual. As you can see, and I'm going to start top to bottom, you've got the two areas where the freight is, and that's just a jumble pile that's on a single field tile. So within a 2 foot by 2 foot area, you've got all the freight that you have access to. These are anybody's colors, right? So there's no indication that this is the freight for red and this is the freight for blue. This would be very much like the crater from a couple years ago, where either alliance can go and get from there, but if your goal is on the left-hand side, you're probably going to get from the one on the left-hand side. If your goal is on the right-hand side, you're probably going to get from the right-hand side. So there's nothing to prevent people from going and taking it, but there are some pretty severe major penalties for interfering with scoring on your opponent's goal, and so you have to play that carefully. But if you've run out from yours, you can obviously get some from the other. In between those two, the closest scoring object to those is the shared shipping hub, and that's in between. If you'll notice these barriers that are on the floor, these barriers are small pieces of like PVC pipe that are laid across the field. That's going to be a drivetrain challenge for teams to go over. We're going to cover that in some other videos that the rest of the team is working on to see what type of drivetrains will work and won't work. But from a game pieces, you get your game pieces from those corners. And then down on the other side of the field, you have these rotational devices that are clamped to the corner of the field. And this is where the ducks come into play, but it's also where your team's custom object comes into play, right? So to introduce a duck onto the field, your human player interacts with this, and then the robot interacts with it on the other side. I can demo that in just a second. But so that's kind of the general scoring. You may notice that these shipping hubs are not mounted to the floor, but they are not, while they could move, they're not designed to be moved. So they are designed to be stationary objects within the context of this game. And so really the game comes down to a cycling game. After Autonomous, which is very placement, it's very much about just picking up objects, moving objects, putting them on the goal. Now, the one really interesting thing to consider here is that you can only move one object at a time. And then the other thing is you have to go completely in to the warehouse to pick up the freight before you can bring it out. So in previous years' games, like the robots could extend and get big and then like reach in, grab something, pull it out, score it, do that. This is a very, very much a driving game. You have to drive somewhere to pick it up. You have to drive to your goal to score it in the goal. Those two things are very important. And when you start talking about the barriers that you might have to drive over, or the small gap that your robot might have to be small enough to drive through, then those are big, big considerations that your team is going to have to figure out. But either way, really the only places to get scoring points are in those warehouses when it comes to the cubes and the balls. Let's talk just easily. Let's start talking about scoring, right? So the carousel, which I mentioned before, which is that area at the end. This is the first autonomous challenge. So the carousel, can we go full screen on the carousel? There we go. So the carousel is bolted in the corner of the field. It's this little turntable thing. And basically the way this works is a human player from the outside of the field puts a duck or an object on the carousel. And then the robot from the inside of the field interacts with this bar, with this tray, spins it, and then the duck falls onto the field. So in autonomous mode, if you do that to the one duck, you get 10 points. That's a lot of points for doing something pretty straightforward. The next few points in autonomous mode are driving. These are robots into a storage unit, robots into a warehouse. Take a look at where those are. Driving during autonomous mode is always one of the easiest things to do. In order for your robot to compete, your robot has a drivetrain. So if you can use the encoders, use some of the programming resources and move it to where you need to go, though you can get easy points. That is completely ignoring all the other game pieces on the field. So your team should be focused on at least making sure that you accomplish one of these parking exercises in autonomous mode. The next one would be freight completely in a storage unit. So if you get freight into the actual storage unit, you'll get 2 points during autonomous mode. And I think that is the preload. So at the beginning of the match, you'll have the opportunity to preload one of these cubes that's been marked with an X. If you just score that, you'll get some points for it. But if there are 3 positions on the field, like in the last few years, and there will only be a cube or there'll only be a duck in one of 3 positions. And if you can use your camera and determine what it is or determine which one it is, and then take your preload freight and put it in the scoring in the exact spot. So if the duck is in the furthest right spot, you see that and you're like, oh, well, that one's the high goal, and you score that, that's worth 10 points. That's pretty great. This year you also have something that's a little bit different, where you can use your team shipping element as your fiduciary indicator for autonomous. And if you, instead of the duck, and if you use this indicator instead of the duck, then you get 20 points for placing it in the right spot. So that's the difference for this year. The good news is that autonomous is always very important for FTC. I think that, if I was building a really simple robot and I didn't want to get involved with scoring a lot of these elements or doing a lot of things, I think that I would build a robot that would try to be able to spin this, because I think that's a pretty simple mechanism that anybody can do, and you can almost do this without driving. And so that's a good number of points. And then also the ability to score, drive forward and score on the shipping hub. Those are straightforward, but they might be a little bit tricky, because remember, your alliance only has 1 dedicated shipping hub. And that means that you'll have 2 robots trying to score in the same spot during autonomous. So that might introduce a little bit of coordination with your alliance, where you want to make sure you don't hit each other, or if one person hits this and it moves slightly, it's going to be a little bit tricky. But getting the duck off of here is something that I think that most teams should be able to do. So the next thing, moving into the teleoperated period, is freight on the storage hub. Now, from a practical perspective, it doesn't matter whether it is a ball, a cube, or a duck. When it's on the field, it is all freight, right? So it doesn't matter what you're shipping, it's all freight. They are all scored exactly the same during the match. And so what you'll notice is freight completely in the storage unit. So the storage unit is just the taped off area of the field. So that is pushing freight into an area. Those are 1 point apiece. Freight on to the lower section, that's 2 points, right? So anything that's down here is worth 2. On the level 3, that's worth 4 points. And then on the top, that's worth 6 points. And then the last one is freight on the shared shipping hub, which is the one that just has the bottom. Those are worth 4 points each. So really the reality here is that just build, if you have something, if you want to build a really great robot for this year's game, you need the ability to pick up all 3 little objects. And then you want to be able to score on any of these levels. Because if you can pick these up and score on any of these levels, you can accomplish all of the majority of the game objectives. So now moving into the end game. The end game's got one really, really important trick I want to point out. I'm going to skip the first one, which is duck or team scoring element delivered, which is 6 points. I'm going to hold that one because I want to talk about that one specifically. But and I just moved it out. I'm going to bring it back. If this is balanced, it's worth 10 points. So that's an easy 10 points if you paid attention to it during the match. The shared shipping hub unbalanced. So what that means is that if it's red and blue and it's towards your side, you'll get 20 points towards the end game. That's a pretty big point total. I think might be some really cool back and forth at the end of the match trying to get it to tip. Hope that turns out pretty good. And then there's parking in the warehouse at the end of the match. The warehouse is right over by the shared shipping hub, so maybe that'll play in. And then the last one is then capping is back. So if you have a custom element and you can cap it on the top, it's 15. Now you'll notice it says capping each team shipping element is 15 points. To me, what that means is that you could stack your elements. So if you and your partner both had something that was like a cone or something, you could put it on top and they could put it on top of that, and then you could double that up. It's pretty similar to the Skystone capping rules, but the nice part about the team shipping element is that it's something that you bring, you can customize it for your team, for your robot, and it's something that you can be very practiced at doing. Everything manipulating the other game objects is going to be very random. Are they going to be the heavy ones, the light ones, or the cubes, or the balls, or everything else? But the actual shipping objects that you bring yourself are something that's in control. So now let's go back to that first one I said I wanted to talk about. So the first thing on this driver element here on the bottom is duck or team shipping element delivered. Okay, so the definition of delivered, the best that I can interpret it today on kickoff, is putting it on here and literally once it's onto this thing and it's spun around by the robot, as soon as it hits the ground, it's been delivered. Now you have at the start of your match 7 ducks in your home area, and so in the end game period, every single duck or team marker that gets delivered through this tray is worth 6 points each. So that means you've got 42 points just in ducks sitting in your driver station in endgame. That is a huge number of points relative to everything else in the game. So it's 6 points. It's the exact same point score as scoring on the top of the goal. So if you wanted to build a really simple robot and kind of maximize your points really quickly, making sure that you've got something that can help bring these ducks into play so you can get those points at the end, which we're going to prototype it, and there'll be another video, but a motor on a stick that spins this would be a very legitimate way to bring a whole bunch of points in. And then obviously every single one of those ducks that you introduce on the field can also be scored in your team goal. So if you can take a duck from here, bring it onto the field and score it to your team goal, that becomes a 12-point duck, which is a huge, huge swing in the points, especially at the end game, which is only the last 30 seconds of the match. So there's a few things to think about in regards to scoring and the game objects. And obviously there's lots of rules to read and there's a lot more to digest on not just the what's about these game objects, but also how your team is going to play that game and do it most efficiently. I hope this was helpful to you as you started your brainstorm strategy. I'm Greg with Rev. We're going to be releasing a whole bunch of more videos throughout the weekend and through the first part of the season. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to us, support@revrobotics.com. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to get notified of more, and we'll see you soon.